Hello, I'm Marcia Cavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. Among the many items left damaged by Hurricane Ida is the city's relationship with Entergy. This week, the fallout worsened. We'll examine power in Louisiana and the clash between those who generate it and those who wield it politically. We'll also take a closer look at the concept of climate change and a demographer's gloomy view on the impact that it could have on southern Louisiana. All that plus the latest news from the street curbs, some of which are still stacked high with garbage, are on the route for tonight's Informed Sources. Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources. Jeff Adelson, reporter, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. Dave Cohen, news director, WWL Radio. And Mark Schliefstein, environmental reporter, the Times-Picayune, the New Orleans Advocate. Let's go on over to Jeff first, and Council has some questions for Entergy New Orleans, I should say.
Yeah, the New Orleans City Council is in the process of moving forward with a number of investigations into the loss of power in New Orleans after Ida. The whole region, that's New Orleans, Jefferson, St. Bernard, and Plaquemines, was left completely in the dark for several days, and then some people weren't getting power back for more than a week or several weeks in some cases after 8 transmission lines went down during the storm. Right now, the City Council is moving forward with an investigation into that outage, which is a fairly typical thing that happens after most hurricanes or most major outages. But council members have been very clear that they want some answers from Entergy about whether the utility was prepared for the storm and how it made decisions in the aftermath.
Go ahead, Jeff.
Oh no, and there's also some much more wide-ranging inquiries that the council's doing, including whether to continue with Entergy New Orleans as its electrical provider, or to take a alternative approach, such as having a CityRun Utility, having a spin-off that would be its own company and not intertwined with Entergy Louisiana and the National Entergy Corporation, or a variety of other options as well.
And Entergy New Orleans, well, Entergy just put that forth also even before the council committee hearing this week.
Yeah, Entergy, sort of trying to get ahead of some of these calls to investigate alternatives, put forward its own set of 4 options, and that includes the ones that the council is looking at, but also included merging Entergy New Orleans into Entergy Louisiana, which provides power in Jefferson and elsewhere in the state. What that would do is actually take power production in the city outside of the New Orleans City Council's purview and put it into the under the jurisdiction of the Public Service Commission. And that's something the City Council, which would have to sign off on this, is pretty loath to do. They see having a specific city regulatory agency as something that protects New Orleans customers and has actually yielded some more progressive policies for Entergy New Orleans that Entergy Louisiana doesn't have, and that includes better rates for people who are have solar panels. That includes more renewable energy generation. And I think a lot of critics of Entergy would say that the New Orleans City Council has been more aggressive in punishing what they'd argue is transgressions by the company than the Public Service Commission, which again oversees Entergy Louisiana outside of the city.
Hey, Jeff, of all those alternatives, I would think that the least popular would be the CityRun Utility idea.
There's actually been a lot of chatter in, outside of the council and Entergy and things like that, more in the neighborhood level about that option. I think just on the sense of moving to a utility that's directly accountable to voters and to ratepayers and that sort of thing. I think obviously the city's experience with the Sewage and Water Board over the years, its current issues with trash collection, which is a contracted service, but certainly has a lot of city oversight, potentially can point to some point to the fact that a city-run utility is not necessarily sort of a silver bullet for how to fix all these things.
So Entergy Louisiana oversees other parishes. Entergy New Orleans is overseen by council, and Entergy Louisiana is overseen by a Public Service Commission, right?
That's correct.
Yeah. Okay. So is there a parallel move within the Public Service Commission to do sort of what the council, New Orleans City Council, is doing with Entergy New Orleans in terms of investigating a little bit further about what happened here?
Yeah, and the Public Service Commission has certainly expressed some interest in looking into exactly what happened with the failures, and that's actually very important for Entergy New Orleans customers because it's very likely that the transmission failures that happened all happened outside of the City Council's jurisdiction and in Entergy Louisiana territory. So in order for there to be any kind of action on this, that's going to require some investigations that are outside of the geographic jurisdiction of the City Council. Now, there may be other ways that they can get to looking into how much was spent on transmission, whether Entergy New Orleans was acting in the best interest of ratepayers and things like that when it contracted with its sister company, Entergy Louisiana, for those transmission lines and things like that. But the most direct way that those answers are going to come out is through a Public Service Commission investigation.
The other big thing that both the Public Service Commission and the City Council want is they're asking the congressional delegation to try and get the federal government to pay for all of these repairs so the ratepayers don't have to, for the 30,000 plus poles that were come down, the countless miles of lines, the transmission lines, because we're talking about payment on our bills if the federal government doesn't pick that up, that the taxpayers and the ratepayers, the customers are going to have to pay, and it's probably going to be $10, maybe $15 a month if the ratepayers have to pay it.
One thing also that council wanted to know at the committee hearing, at the utilities committee hearing on what was that, Wednesday, was just how much has Entergy New Orleans put into hardening the infrastructure. Entergy said the folks there from Entergy said they didn't have that information.
Yeah, there were a number of really key questions that council members were asking Entergy at Wednesday's hearing, and they didn't really get a lot of solid information on that. That includes transmission issues, that includes why during Hurricane Gustav, which was a storm that similarly knocked out transmission lines, power was able to be restored a little more quickly than during Ida. And that also included questions about the New Orleans Power Station, which is the power plant that was just completed in the last few years in New Orleans East, and how it performed and what its role was in restoring power. So those are all things that I think the council has expressed a significant interest in, and will probably continue to play a role in the investigations.
And the community at large is interested in the answers there, too.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot there, Jeff. Errol, let's go on over to you. A little bit of background about Entergy New Orleans.
Yeah, hearing all this about who regulates what reminds me we've been to this dance before. The company that provides the utilities for New Orleans, going back to 1922, was called New Orleans Public Service Incorporated, or NOPSI. NOPSI operated the utilities, also operated transit, and the joke used to be that NOPSI heats our home and takes us for a ride. But anyway, they provide the utilities for a long time. And then into the 1970s, there was a big controversy when they got involved with a nuclear power plant in Mississippi called Grand Gulf. And there were lots of questions about the cost that be passed to the consumers, whether or not it was needed. So there's a lot of controversy and a lot of challenging going back and forth. In 1982, an amendment was proposed to change the regulation of NOPSI away from the City Council to the Public Service Commission. Now, by this time, NOPSI regulated or serviced New Orleans, and the rest of the area was serviced by a company called LP&L, Louisiana Power and Light. And Louisiana Power and Light was regulated by the State Public Service Commission, and NOPSI by the City Council. So a referendum was put on the ballot. There was a vote. It was a very low turnout election, and NOPSI put a lot of money into it, and without much controversy, it passed. And so the regulation was taken away from the City Council to go to LP&L. Well, within a year or so, people said, that wasn't a very good idea, because putting in the hands and the regulation of the Public Service Commission means there's there are 5 members on the commission. It means there's one person that's representing New Orleans. Whereas if it's regulated by the council, you got all 7 people who live and work in New Orleans, and so you can have a lot more interest. So there was another movement to counter that referendum, and in 1985 an election was held. And I got to say, this was a classic street-level campaign. A lot of credit goes to an organization called the Alliance for Affordable Energy, which is a nonprofit group that was able to figure out all of these figures, and also Gambit newspaper. It was one of its finest hours, and it did a lot of editorializing and a lot of explanations. And then towards the end, the Times-Picayune came in and endorsed the idea too. And so in 1985, a classic example of citizen action from the grassroots, there was another vote, and by a 2-to-1 vote, the people voted to transfer the regulation back to the city council away from the Public Service Commission. And so, and that was the beginning of a new relationship. In the past, the city council was pretty passive in its relationship with utilities, but now you've seen a whole different attitude.
Okay, and we'll see how things continue to progress this go-around. Thanks a lot, E. Dave, over to you. With the troubles that we've been having here in South Louisiana with the storms, and then having, power problems after these storms, kind of might have an impact on our population, according to a local demographer.
Yeah, we're still 100,000 people fewer in the city of New Orleans than we were before Hurricane Katrina just over 16 years ago. And so we've seen this before, different storm, different impacts, many things different about it. But what is the same is that there are some people who, after a major disaster, decide they can't do it anymore or don't want to do it anymore for any number of reasons. And demographer Greg Rigamer has crunched the numbers based on what he is able to do without a whole lot of hard evidence right now. But he expects that particularly outside of the levee protection, we're talking mostly in the bayou parishes, in parts of the river parishes, he thinks that tens of thousands of people, and region-wide, about 100,000 people, will probably move away as a result of the impacts of Hurricane Ida and not come back. And he thinks that it will take years if we ever recoup that population. Note that Louisiana as a state and New Orleans as a city, we're seeing extremely slow population growth prior to Hurricane Ida and since Hurricane Katrina as well. We're not seeing the 7 to 10% population growth that our neighbors in Texas are seeing, for example. For here, people just aren't coming here. Most of the growth is by birth and just the pure normal progression of people adding to the population by having children. So we heard anecdotally, for example, at the City Council Sanitation Committee, where several people got up and said, hey, I'm a lifelong resident. I've lived in New Orleans and loved New Orleans all of my life. I put up with the corruption and the incompetence, but I can't put up with not picking up the garbage. That if they can't at least do the simplest thing of picking up the trash, and instead I have rancid, fly-laden, smelly, stinky garbage that just sits in front of my house for weeks and weeks. For a lot of people, that may have been the straw that breaks their back and makes them decide it's time to move away. But like anything else, in the immediate aftermath of an emotional situation, people do say things that maybe in the long run they reconsider. We'll see. But Greg Rigamer, the demographer, really believes that we'll probably see about 100,000 people less living here in Southeast Louisiana after this is all over with Ida than there were before. And, we hear it, most people tell me that either with their friends or their family, that they've at least had the discussion about how much more can they take, because now we're living with more frequent and more powerful hurricanes. It used to be that once a generation we had one of these huge storms, and there was kind of the storm of record for each generation. Well, now Katrina was just 16 years ago. Laura was just a year ago, right next door in southwest Louisiana. And you look through the Gustavs and the Ikes and the major storms that we all experienced, not only here, but across Louisiana. And if you widen it out to look across the entire Gulf Coast, since 2017, Every year, at least one major hurricane has made landfall somewhere between Florida and Texas. So some people just can't take it anymore. But then you follow that question with, okay, where are you going to go?
Yeah, right. Where do you go?
Where there's not going to be wildfires,
Right.
where there's not going to be earthquakes, where there's not going to be
Floods,
tornadoes,
flooding.
floods,
Also, I mean, any kind of
blizzards,
natural disaster.
volcanic eruptions we saw this week.
But
Right.
Dave, I think a lot of people might be tied down by their jobs and family, even if they want to move, but they can't move. But I think the difference is with the next generation, with their kids, when they're making decisions where they want to go. And I think that's where we're most likely to lose people.
Well, and also keep in mind something that the pandemic just taught us is that a lot of jobs can be done anywhere in the world as long as you have internet. And that's another thing we've been hearing from people. Not only were the power outages bad enough, but I've talked to people who got whole house generators. They said, I was fine with the power. I had my air conditioning, I had my refrigeration, I could keep food cold, I could cook food, I could stay comfortable. But without their internet, they said they couldn't do their jobs.
Right.
And between Cox and AT&T and Charter Spectrum in this region, there are still thousands and tens of thousands of customers who still don't have their internet back. And that's becoming an issue. A lot of people thought, well, I'll just fall back to my mobile internet. I'll use a hotspot or a hotspot off my cell phone. But then we saw between T-Mobile and AT&T, major problems providing cell phone service in the wake of the storm. So a lot of people, it's particular to everybody, but a lot of people feel like they want to go somewhere where it's maybe, things are a little more hardened and more rigid. We heard one gentleman testify before the city council that he evacuated to Dallas. And he said while he was there, he realized how clean it was and how well it was run. And he said he had to slap himself in the face and ask his grandson, am I in heaven? And his grandson responded, no, you're in Dallas.
Well, there's also just to Louisianians and New Orleanians and folks from the metro region, we're so attached to this area. It's a hard decision to make, to leave. But these storms and then these extended power outages are giving people pause. There's no doubt about that. And
Yeah,
it's
but they'll still miss the food and the culture. But
yeah,
we'll see,
yeah. This has been a hard one, though. And Mark, let's go on over to you because all of this is related to all this entire discussion to climate change. So background us a bit. When we're talking climate change, what are we talking about?
Well, let's go through some of the steps here. First of all, we're talking about greenhouse gases, and that includes carbon dioxide, methane, such as natural gas, and nitrogen oxides that are released into the atmosphere by human activities, mostly by some form of burning, including vehicle exhausts, electricity generation, and in Louisiana especially through industry. Refinery and petrochemical manufacturing. So you've got these gases that get into the air. When the sun shines on the earth, these gases block some of its heat from being bounced back into space. And that increases the temperature in the atmosphere, in the ocean, and on land over time. And so think of it about what happens when sunlight shines on a car's windows. When they're closed and how the heat builds up inside. And that's basically what's happening to the Earth today, to a much more extreme level, obviously. So since this has been happening really in terms of the human causes since the beginning of the industrial age. So this is period of 1850 to 1900 that everybody uses as sort of the start point for climate change caused by humans. And the Earth's average temperature so far since that time has increased by more than 1.2 degrees Celsius, about 4 degrees total Fahrenheit. And it could increase to 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. And so what happens if that occurs? What is happening now as that occurs? Well, we've already seen significant changes resulting from temperature increases. We've got loss of water around the world from large ice masses, including Greenland and Antarctica, the reduction in the annual size of the Arctic Circle, Arctic ice mass, and of course with glaciers. And all that water goes into the world's oceans and causes those oceans to rise a bit. But in addition to that, the heating of the ocean itself, each one of those water molecules, as they warm, they get bigger as well. So all of that adds up. So what does that mean here? Well, In South Louisiana, we're already seeing that sea level rise, this what's called eustatic sea level rise, water itself rising, is becoming a more large piece of the issue for coastal Louisiana and the water heights that are occurring there. It has up until this time and still is more a question of land sinking along the coast being much more significant. But now we've got this water rise occurring, and that's going to occur at a much greater rate over the rest of this century. By 2050, we could see water heights increasing 1.6 feet maybe along the coast, and by the end of the century, as much as 4 feet. And that's under an average temperature increase, not the worst case. If it's worst case, we could see 6 meters of rise, which is 18 feet along our coast. And what does that do? Well, there are maps out there, including ones that the state of Louisiana have published as worst case for its coastal master plan, that show Lake Maurepas and Lake Pontchartrain merging with the land bridge along Highway 51 becoming underwater. Areas along outside of the federal levee systems along the Mississippi River becoming underwater. So those are significant issues that are going to increase the efforts, the push on people to relocate. So those are some problems. And then you've got a variety of other issues here. You've got the increase in temperature allows the atmosphere to capture more moisture on a day-to-day basis. And when that moisture increases in the air, which we saw this summer, it means more rainfall when it comes over us. Any sort of trigger of low pressure can cause that to occur. And we saw that especially with hurricanes, where hurricanes, that's a key factor for hurricanes, that people say, yes, climate change is causing hurricanes to create more rainfall. In addition, for hurricanes, climate change is also causing a bit of an increase in their intensity. So we saw this Category 4 thing that occurred this past year, and Category 4 last year, and there's a good chance that those also have climate associated with them.
Okay, we have to wrap this up a little bit. And frequency of hurricanes too. I mean, we're getting close to the alphabet again this year.
There's
no bearing there?
There's not evidence so far that frequency is occurring yet, that there's more hurricanes as a result of climate change, especially in the Atlantic. I'm a little bit less certain about that in the Pacific, but so far there are natural causes for the more frequent hurricanes that we're seeing during this present 40-year period.
Okay.
What's more important is, what are we going to do about this?
Right, and you know what? We're going to have to do that for Mark Schliefstein lesson number 2, part B, on another show. But this has been great, Mark. Thanks a lot. Let's go over to Dave quickly now to wrap us up in this discussion. And those trash heaps still there, particularly in Orleans, having a real hard time with it.
Yeah, well, and it's not just New Orleans, but New Orleans, it's been a very public problem, and people have been very vocal about it. And last week we told you that the city was calling in its Operation Mardi Gras to have public employees from a variety of different agencies using city-owned vehicles, city heavy equipment, city trucks, to go around and start picking up trash. That did not go as well as the city had hoped. It did not make as big a dent as they had hoped. We've seen volunteers going around and picking up people's trash with their own trucks and bringing them to the transfer station. That has been somewhat successful, but today the mayor announced she signed 4 more contracts. They finally found 4 companies that said they did have trucks, they did have enough employees that they could come and help. So starting today, 4 more groups of trash collection companies have hit the streets to try and get some of these areas picked up. And again, we're now over a month in parts of the city that have not had trash collection before Hurricane Ida because of the problems that particularly Metro was having picking up the trash. So, but we heard from residents in Laplace, for example. They have stacks of trash and debris where homes flooded and had roof damage and had rain damage, but they've got stacks of debris now as tall as their homes. And here we are 26 days after Ida hit. They said, we can't move on as long as these stacks are here. We can't do anything as long as all of the drywall, all of the roofing materials, all of our furniture and everything is still sitting in our front lawn. So they are begging and pleading to not be forgotten and for that to be picked up as well. So we've heard it from North Shore, South Shore, east of the city, west of the city. Trash collection remains a major, major problem.
And so in Orleans, 4 more companies to begin immediately?
Yes, they were supposed to hit the streets today and start picking up. So I think we now have a total of 7 different companies, along with city employees, all out there, and an army of volunteers as well, out there trying to get all of this trash collected. And in some neighborhoods, we're getting reports that it's made a huge impact, that people feel like finally all the trash is gone, they're able to cut their grass, and things are starting to feel a little more normal now because they look a little more normal. But in other neighborhoods, they just keep waiting and waiting, wondering when the flies and the vermin and the maggots and the smell will be gone.
I feel for them. All right, guys, other stories. Let's go over to you, E.
A company named J.D. Power, which does a study of businesses, did a study on customer satisfaction at airports. It had 2 categories of airports: mega airports, which were 33 million passengers or higher a year, and what they call large airports, 10 to 33 million. And in the large airport category, New Orleans finished number 1. Number 2 was Tampa. Number 3 with Durham, North Carolina. But I think it's a good reflection on the new terminal.
Yeah, congrats to our new terminal. All right, let's go on over to Jeff.
So, as most people probably know, the city municipal elections were delayed from October to November. That also came as everyone was sort of suspending campaigns or distracted with other things. That's really going to start picking up now in October as candidates are getting back out there. Forums are starting, things like that. So get ready for political season.
Okay, Mark, over to you.
So I'll give you a foretaste on the climate front for what the state is doing. The Climate Initiatives Task Force of the governor next month will be attempting to winnow down more than 100 ideas for reducing climate emissions across the state, with many of those aimed at oil and gas industry, petrochemical industry, and utilities, and getting them to reduce emissions or find ways of storing them permanently.
All right, thanks a lot, Mark. Dave.
A dome coming, despite the fire that everyone probably saw video of on the exterior of the Superdome this week. 1 week from Sunday, the New Orleans Saints will come home to play a game in the New Orleans Superdome, in the Louisiana Superdome, and it doesn't look like anything's going to stop that. They're going to play in Foxborough, Massachusetts this week, and then they're coming back to their Metairie training facility after the game, and we'll play in the Dome a week from Sunday.
And then we will welcome them home. Okay, guys, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you all for joining us, too. See you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.